cheat codes, secrets, and hacks to making platinum tracks. Stay tuned. Peace and blessings, guys. My name is SG1 from Music Millionaires TV, and also known as Music Business Tips. And this channel is dedicated to teaching you guys how to grow your music and or YouTube business to be successful. Now, some of the things that will help you succeed in your music and or YouTube channel is understanding how it works. Also, by having the proper tools and training, you can become a professional and taken serious by those in the entertainment community. Which reminds me, even though I said channel at the very beginning of my introduction, we are actually a community. We're a community of platinum producers, songwriters, artists, and videographers who have come together to basically give you guys what we understand and know that made us successful in the industry. So if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. Take advantage of having the resources of platinum producers, songwriters, and those of us that have been in the entertainment business for decades at a time. It's really a resource that you could not put a price tag on. So guys, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Now guys, in this particular episode, I contacted some friends of mine at Maschine Masters to give you guys the 2017 Producers Cheat Codes. And what does that mean basically? For those of you who've been wanting to understand and learn music scales, chord progression, and you have little or no knowledge of music theory, this particular video will definitely give you shortcuts to be able to start banging out some platinum-worthy tracks. And it's being offered and taught by my man, MJ the Future.
What's going on, everybody? This is MG the Future again with a Maschine Masters exclusive. Today really isn't a tutorial. It's more of a request or an answer to some questions I have seen in regards to previous videos about music theory, especially the J Dilla and Kanye West one. I want to kind of slow things down a bit and go over some basics as far as putting together different chords and melodies. And music theory in itself, I don't think it's something I can teach you. And what I mean by that is music theory is something you learn and do forever. It's the way you play an instrument. It's what gives birth to different styles, and when people say someone has their own sound, that all comes out of practicing what we all call music theory. So it's not like you could read a book about it or watch this video and overnight, you're a maestro. I'm definitely not. I'm not classically trained. I've been playing over 10 years, of course. Some people like to say by ear, but for me, I didn't learn by ear. In fact, I don't hear like a lot of people hear to begin with. But that's a whole nother conversation for a different time. I learned technically on my own using patterns. And that's what I'm going to attempt to show a lot of you guys. So if you're classically trained and you play 20 instruments and you're in church every Sunday jamming, this may not be for you. However, if you're someone who's pretty passionate about making music and you sample a lot and you're really dope at drums, but you want to start building chords and doing different types of songs, whether it's EDM, pop, house, R&B, or, stuff like the Neptunes and Scott Storch used to do, well, this is a good starting point for you. And of course, the resources that I point to will help you practice along the way. Another point I want to make about this music theory stuff is I want you to think of it kind of like a foreign language. So for me, that would be Spanish. I studied Spanish 8 years through school. So that's middle school all the way through high school. And I noticed one thing about it. When I actually got into the real world, and for me at that time was like fast food restaurants and different grocery stores, no one understood what I was talking about. And more importantly, I didn't understand what they were talking about when we're talking in Spanish. And the reason for that is you can learn all the vosotros you want, all the verb conjugations you want. You can learn, the classical writings of such and such, of Don Quixote. It doesn't matter. If the people you use it with do not also use it the same, it's pointless, to an extent, of course. So what I had to do was I had to speak to people in their language and in my language at the same time. I would have to reteach myself and throw hundreds of verb conjugations and tenses out the window just so I can have a normal conversation and function a restaurant or manage a restaurant. So I want you to think about that when learning music theory. We have tons of scales, tons of modes, and you only have 12 keys on the keyboard, and you break those down in fractional, have a fraction of them for equal degrees and temperaments, so you can convey a feeling or a certain tension. That's a really technical terms, but when it's time to learn all this stuff, I guess the rhetorical question is, do you need to learn all of it to convey what you want to convey? And even if you did, is that what everyone else wants to hear? So if you think of an example like Scott Storch, I've seen him play piano. He can go up and down the octave with no problem, blindfolded. You can crisscross your hands. You can play the keyboard upside down if you want to. But the biggest song he's ever done is Lean Back. How complicated is that? So it's dope, very dope to know and become a master of your craft. But at the same time, we want to be practical to make sure it translates into good music. So that's what I'm going to try to help you do. Give you some shortcuts and tips on what that means. And hopefully that benefits somebody that's watching today. So this next part is going to be about where to go to get some information to help you get started learning or practicing music theory. I would think it would be wise that you learn your scales first. So this site right here is called A Passion for Jazz. There's many sites like it, but around 2002, 2003, this is the only one you could find, easily at least. And what it does is it breaks down the root, which is the key you're in, and it breaks down the chord like a C major chord. But more importantly, it breaks down the scales. As you can see, C major is all white keys. So you have all these different scales you could possibly learn. And then all these chords you could possibly learn. And in each different key. So with that, it could be quite overwhelming. So my advice in starting out is just to pick one. The most realistic one will be a C and a major scale, because it's right in front of you. There's not a lot to remember in terms of what keys belong to that scale, since they're all white keys. And then once you finish learning that, you do something like move to its relative minor. So you can learn A minor, and you'll notice that they're pretty much the same, but their differences comes from their tonic. Basically, when you start writing chords out and playing in different modes, where you start is going to change, because the distance between 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 is going to be different when you're starting on 1 and, let's say, C major. And that's just one way to go about it as far as practicing and playing and learning. So if you learn if you learn C major, you learned A minor. You just have to get the positioning and the modes different, or the chords are slightly different. Another one to learn right after that, of course, is if you know C major, go ahead and learn C minor scale. And that's what I did. In fact, those are the only two I play ever, because you can transpose on your keyboard to go to different ones, and tools like Logic and Ableton Live have modifiers which translate the incoming Midi notes that you're playing and outputs them as a different scale for you. And I knew that was coming a long time ago. I think I first ran into a tool like that around 2005. So I started playing seriously in 2003, and about within 2 years, they already had these tools coming out. And I made a decision at that point to learn how to play my scales better, faster, different variations, different inversions, rather than learning all 12, or if you go on the scale list, all of these. But that's just me. So now to use this a little bit more practically in terms of scales, I'm going to turn to Ableton, but you can do this in any program. So I'm going to go ahead and right click a selection, insert a MIDI clip as a blank area, and I'm going to draw just all white keys. And I'm starting on C, so this is going to be C major. And I'm going to add the octave, which is C7. Let me drag this down to maybe C4 so it's not so high. All right, so basically what I like about Ableton, especially if you're doing this, if you're not playing this live, but you're learning, like if you're using piano roll and Fruity Loops and you draw everything, which I know a lot of people do. In fact, I've spent a couple years doing that as well. Ableton lets you fold and focus on just the keys that you drew. So if you play a chord and record it and fold it, you can go ahead and build from there. What I like to do is make my scale folded, and now I know no matter where I draw, I'm in scale. The timing on that's terrible, but you get the idea. You can write your melodies and patterns within the keys locked into your scale with no problem. And of course, Ableton has a Midi modifier that does the same thing in real time for people who are playing it on their keyboard. But the reason why I broke it down like this is so that I can start showing you, once you know your scale or have your scale, how do you build progressions? So the next part is going to be this side. So we're going to switch this to C major as well. And you're going to notice something, that this is not in the order that it is on the keyboard. This is in the order of the circle of fifths. There's a lot of great YouTube videos about the circle of fifths. I recommend you taking a look at them. So if it sounds like I'm just breezing through this, it's because it's a way bigger subject than I can fit into a few minutes. But for the purposes of learning, it's not that complicated. So in C major, the circle of fifths has all 6 keys. As you can see here, we have C all the way up. I'm missing one here. I just noticed that. B. There we go. And what you're going to see is the most important ones is where the 1 is. So you have 1, then 2 goes out of here, 3, 4, 5. And that's what I want to focus on. This slice right here, C, F, and G, 1, 4, and 5, is the most common chords used in every scale. So you got that. You got F and you got G. And these are the root notes of those chords. And the reason why that's important, or this Roman degree system is important, is because then you can go to websites like Chordify or Hook Theory, and they write down the songs or translate the songs into what chords are being used. So as you can see here, 1, 4, 6, and 5 is gaining popularity. And you can see and hear songs that match that style. And what's cool about this formula system is that it works for any scale. So even if you're not using C major, and let's say you're using G major, the 1 and 4 or 5 will work. Although it'll sound different, it's playing the same role or same function. And you'll learn that over time. So for instance, you can transpose this when you're done and pick the one that sounds best to you. But the spacing is what's important. The pattern is what's important. And that's why that circle of fifths is so powerful. So you're going from 1 to 4 to 5. You'll notice they all touch. So you're leaving a key to go to its neighbor, then you're jumping over and coming back home. So it's like if it was a bouncing ball, you're going C to F, F to G, G back to C. And since they're all touching each other, they call it a diatonic or harmonic. So to convert this into chords, the easiest way that I learned, especially when I was playing on a keyboard, I knew what these keys were, especially since they're all white. Chords are just every other key. So you can just click in every other key while this is folded. If you unfold it, the spacing is different. So you notice a major is it's going to be its perfect fifth, which is 7 keys apart. And the second key, the middle key, is going to be 4, 4 major, 3, 4 minor. But we can keep going from here. And I'm going to run out of space soon. So what you can do is just copy and paste to give yourself another octave, so to speak. And then fold it again. So now you have something more like this. Let me see if I can loop that up. And here's the tricky part. That by itself sounds kind of boring. So what I would normally do is, since most of our music is divided by 4 and we're only using 3 chords, you can just duplicate it. And that doesn't break the harmony or anything. It's the same chord repeating, so it doesn't change its tone. And you don't have to do that for the last chord. You can do that for the first chord as well. There's many ways to do it. This is a very basic example, but the highlight or the takeaway from that is basically you're taking all the keys that are in your scale, and it's typically 7 in the most common scales. In this program, I folded it, and then because chords are usually built on every other key, you just double click in every other key. You can eventually split this away so you don't hear it when you do playback, and split and loop just the passage you're creating. But it's cool to have like a guide or a ruler or like a tracing sheet, so to speak, when you're writing out these chords. And all right, so in this part, we want to change it up a little bit. Right now I have a 4 measure range or 4 measure range looped up over 1 bar at 100 beats per minute. And so far this stuff is pretty basic in this format. I want to recap real quick what's going on. If I repeat it enough, it'll just stick with you. So we have all the major keys, or all white keys for C major, also A minor. We folded it in Ableton. Fruity Loops has a similar thing. I believe in the file menu and the piano roll, you can just draw the scale in different chords. So you can select a major and then click on C and it'll give you the whole scale. Logic, I think, does it too. Studio One limits the scale. There's a few programs that do it. You're gonna have to find out the best workaround for your particular program. But in this one, it just seems to be the easiest, although it's missing some of the powerful tools that Fruity Loops has, which I wish they would incorporate. But anyway, so right now I have 1, 4, and 5, which based on the circle are all neighboring chords. They're the only major chords in this particular demonstration. So you'll notice in the Roman numeral system, uppercase is major, lowercase is minor. This degree symbol means it's diminished. Diminished plays different roles for different advanced types of music and scales and chord progressions, but it's barely used or not commonly used in the music that I make. So I disregard that key altogether when using, when building a chord. So I wouldn't do a 1, 4, 5, 7. I never have, never will. However, I will use the keys that this chord uses and switch them up or add them to different chords, or I'll go ahead and invert them and create different chords out of them, especially if I'm changing keys or writing bridges. But that's a little bit more advanced. So we have 7 keys in the scale, and only 3 of them are used for chords, most commonly. But most of our music is, especially R&B, is 4 chords. So that's why this website's important, because it gives you almost every 4 chord that there is being used in music, and you can see the examples of music using it. So let's switch it up a little bit. Let's do like a, all right, so this is Cool Kids. That's a pretty cool progression. So it's 1, 5, 6, then 4. So I'll move my 5 chord over. This is my 4 chord, so that's the last one. So we got 1, 5, 4. And it wants us to do a 6. So that's easy. If this one's 5, this one's going to be 6. And you just double click in every other key. So 1, 5, 6, 4 is what they're talking about. Let's hear it. And this is running really fast. You could even space it out a little bit. And we're going to change our loop boundaries to match. And then from there, You could switch up your sounds and start building your beat around it. What I like to do is write all my chords in piano first, because that's the most common way I've played it, learned it, and hear it. And it's usually easier sound to identify whether something's harmonic or if you missed a key. Even if you don't have like perfect pitch hearing, piano just has an acquired taste about it. And then from here, switch it up to a different sound. And that's just for writing your chords. Now, when you're writing your melodies with these chords, you could do the same thing. You can just write the same key. So say, for instance, this one. You could do stuff like that, as long as it stays in the range of that chord. And it doesn't have to. It's just the easier way to do it. And since it's every other key, it's just a lot easier to write. And you could stretch out keys and do different things like that. If you're like me and you're playing it on keyboard, it's the same thing, but your fingers and their positioning on the keys help you stay within each chord too. Another thing that's pretty cool with using it this way is just inversion. So you'll see there's a big jump up from 1 to 4 into 5 and down again, or 1 to 5 then 6 and 4. So you could take certain keys, hold shift and press down. It's going to stay the same key, but it's going to move it down an octave. So the chord doesn't really change. How it sounds may change, but it's a easier step, so to speak. And if your melody's not playing C twice at the end, you can move. So I'm going to move F an octave up, but I'm going to keep it an octave down as well, so it doesn't break the progression. So it's the same keys in the chord. I'm just adding an octave to the F there. Then from here, I'll quickly touch on how the Neptunes do. So they use 7s and 9s. So 7 within this format is the 4th key. And when I unfold it, you'll see it's the 7th key within your scale. So they call it a 7th, but it's really the 4th key, or if you're doing every other key, or if you're following that pattern. So if I put a 7th here, it runs right into my next one. So let's see what that sounds like. And we'll do the same thing for the second chord. We'll add another key there. So it kind of bridges our way up to our octave chord. Now my second chord, you could keep it like this. Now this is the part where theory turns into preference and taste. I'm just going along just to show you how this pattern works, or this fold works, and how if you're using all white keys, every other key is a chord, etc. But now I'm adding on to it. So I added a 7th so far, and I want to show you that before I get too carried away here. So we do C and a major 7th. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're looking at just the white keys, it's every other key. That's all I'm doing in this format. All right, now this one, instead of doing a 7th, which logically might actually work pretty good here, so let's hear it. Instead of doing that, or at least not doing it by itself, let's add another key here. Let's add its 9th. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, every other key. Sounds kind of strong, so let's remove some parts from it. And that's it. And like I said, once you get a good progression going and it's something you like, and because we're drawing it, you can then go to your keyboard, you see the keys, and then you can then play it. You can then memorize it. You can then learn and pick up from it. To me, that's so much more useful because we're picking up what everyone else is doing, so to speak, the way, the language that people understand it. We're using our guides to make sure we're following the rules that are set by music theory. And now we're freestyling with it to create our own quote unquote sound. From here, you're changing sounds. You can even octave the bottom down. That could be a bass. You could assign each note or each lane of notes or row of notes to its own instrument as well. That's something that people in orchestras do. All tons of stuff. You can even start writing your melody. Like if you're looking at this grid from here, I can tell you probably the better sounding melody is going to start right here at B and go up. You could start at the bottom. I do that a lot. I'll start at the root and go up and play my melody within the chords themselves, but you could also play your melody at the top. I mean, there's really no rules when it comes to that, especially if you're in scale, in key, and it's moving as your chords are moving. But one last thing, let's go ahead and change up the sound a little bit. What I'm going to do in this part is, since my pad is following the same chord as my piano was, I'm going to put the piano back in, but I'm going to stagger it. I should actually start at the end here. And that's it, man. This video is a little bit longer, and I wish I could make it longer because I feel like I'm just getting warmed up. So I'm going to try to do more videos covering a different part of this. If there's anything you have questions about what I've done so far, please let me know in the comments right here on the Maschine Masters YouTube channel. Also, if there's things you want to learn more of for a future video, please also leave comments. In fact, I did this video because of previous comments and people just wanting some better insight. This subject, I was hoping would be 10 minutes long, but it's looking more like 20, and that's just scratching the surface. Again, just check out the Rand's colored circle of fifths chart, this way so you know what your degrees are within the scale that you select. You use Passion for jazz charts so you know what your scales are or what keys you're working with, whether you're drawing them in via Midi or playing them live on your keyboard. You do Chordify, which will transfer all the new songs or any song you give it into chords. Or you can use something like this where you work off the Roman degrees, and you can use that in any scale that has them. So for instance, one last thing, when you see 1, 4, and 5 capitalized, like it is here, that is a major scale. So make sure you keep that in mind. When you switch it to a minor scale, 1, 4, and 5 becomes lowercase. And those become the most important keys of the minor scale. The C, F, and G, but instead of them being 1, 4, and 7, they become 1, 3, and 7, etc. But you could use this. Pachelbel is the most famous progression in the world. And you could just start making pop songs and chord progressions in a heartbeat. And then learn how to play your own music so that it sticks into your memory. But anyway, hopefully this was helpful. Again, like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for joining us.